most of its major seas by international projects. Researchers did...
Firefighters were called to the Radisson Blu Hotel in Berlin after a loud crack was heard in the early hours of Friday morning. The hotel, which is housed in the same building as the vast Aquadome Aquarium, evacuated its guests as 264,000 gallons of water rushed out of the complex. Police are still investigating why the aquarium burst and would not comment on whether the crack was caused by freezing temperatures overnight. The aquarium housed more than 1,500 tropical fish. Berlin's Mayor Franziska Giffey confirmed that none of the fish could be saved. For NPR News, I'm Esme Nicholson in Berlin.
This hour in Wall Street, U.S. stocks trading lower with the Dow down 1.4% or 477 points at 32,724. It's NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Fidelity. With Fidelity Income Planning, Fidelity looks at how much clients save, how much they'll need, and helps them build a plan for cash flow so they can go from saving to living. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC.
This is World Cafe. I'm Raina Duris. Nickelback has zillions of fans. In a decade after releasing their breakout album, Silver Side Up, and the accompanying single, How You Remind Me, every one of their albums went at least platinum. Some of them went diamond, meaning they sold over 10 million copies. That's about as successful as you can get, but they've also had a lot of haters. If you're a fan, or if you've never looked beyond Nickelback's big hits, this is your chance to get to know one of the most polarizing bands of this millennium. They just released their 10th album, Get Rollin'. Today I'm joined by frontman Chad Kruger and guitarist Ryan King for a candid conversation about songwriting success and how the public perception of Nickelback, especially among the haters, has changed in recent years. Oh, and Chad even gets his guitar out at one point during the demonstration.
To develop scalable nuclear fusion become a reality? Joining me now to talk about this fusion breakthrough and other top science news of the week is my guest, Casey Strauhart, climate reporter at MIT Technology Review, based in New York. Casey, welcome back.
Thanks so much for having me back, Byron.
Well, you're welcome. Let's talk about this. This is about a whole bunch of laser beams, right?
Yes, no fewer than 192 laser beams, one of them actually has the world's largest and most energetic laser system. So it's really big science going on there.
And so they shot the laser beams at a fuel pellet.
Yes, yeah.
And they got more energy out than they put in.
Yep, so it's a really big milestone for fusion research. This experiment lasted just a few billionths of a second, and they used the lasers to put about 2 megajoules of energy into a fuel pellet and got about 3 megajoules back, which, like you mentioned, has never been done before in fusion research.
But there's a little fly in the ointment here, because if we look at the whole setup, I mean, wasn't there more energy used to power the lasers that came out during the reaction?
Yeah, so that's a really big fly in the ointment, if you want to call it that. So this laser was designed to be very efficient. So in order to make that 2 megajoules of energy, it actually pulled about 300 off of the grid. So as far as the whole system goes, it's still taking a lot more energy to power these reactions than what we're getting out, which is kind of one of the big things that a lot of people are saying this week. This is really exciting, but we're still pretty far from actually being able to generate energy using fusion.
They were talking about, well, we used to talk about fusion always being 3 decades away. Maybe it's only 2 decades away. Now, because scientists have been trying and failing to make progress for decades. So what's so promising about the potential of fusion energy that it's worth trying and trying and trying again?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think that the energy community has always been so interested because fusion energy could, produce a ton of energy without all those greenhouse gases that cause climate change. And in theory, it could use, pretty small amounts of a somewhat widely available fuel. A lot of fusion uses isotopes or types of hydrogen. So it's absolutely something that's fascinated researchers for decades.
Yeah, and as we say, it's decades away, so it's not going to solve our reducing fossil fuel emissions problem right now.
Probably. So it depends on who you ask as far as the fusion timeline goes. This approach to fusion that Lawrence Livermore National Lab is using isn't really the one that people think is the most likely to be commercialized. There are different ways to do fusion energy. Some startup companies are doing things a little bit differently in a way that they say could come about a little bit quicker. You know, maybe having some reactors going in a decade or so, but I think we're still a long ways off, and there's a ton of science still to go and a ton of engineering work and innovation that still needs to happen to turn this from science into technology, I would say.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to some other energy news, and this is pretty important. This week, the Department of Energy released some additional details from last year's infrastructure bill, talking about the kinds of projects that are eligible to receive carbon capture and removal funding. This is kind of important, is it not?
Yeah, this is really big news for what is a pretty developing field. So this is funding that, like you said, was included in the infrastructure law that was passed last year, and this includes about $3 billion for direct air capture funding. And this is a technology that basically pulls carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, kind of in an attempt to reduce the climate pollution that we've already emitted. Mm-hmm. But this is really a developing technology, and there's a long way to go to make it work kind of efficiently and economically. So it's really interesting to see how the federal government is kind of going to be spending this money.
And environmentalists, though, are kind of upset by this, are they not?
Yeah, this is pretty controversial. I think some people see direct air capture as something that, you know, some groups are using in order to justify continuing emissions. But in particular, some of these projects that are going to be technically eligible for funding are particularly controversial. The rules included projects that use the captured carbon dioxide for what's called enhanced oil recovery. Basically, you take that carbon dioxide that you capture and you pump it underground to get more fossil fuels out, which kind of goes counter to this idea of trying to cut emissions.
Yeah, I can see why they're a bit upset. Well, let's move on to our last energy story, because there's some interesting new research about how methane levels actually went up during the 2020 lockdown. How is that?
Yeah, this is a really fascinating story. So methane, it's a powerful greenhouse gas. You might be familiar with it because cows often get blamed for it. But there are a lot of different sources of methane. And these researchers found that during the 2020 lockdowns, human sources of methane went down because, you know, a lot less people were moving around, industries shut down. But natural sources of methane actually saw an increase in emissions. And it's sort of a complicated reason why. Partially it's because we're seeing, you know, higher temperatures, and a lot of wetlands and other kinds of natural sources give off more methane when temperatures go up. But then there's also this weird kind of effect where other kinds of pollution that we emit can chemically react with methane to pull it out of the atmosphere. So when we stopped emitting those other kinds of pollution, that kind of deterrent effect on methane stopped.
Wow, that's kind of complex there, isn't it?
I think that's why I really am fascinated by these kinds of stories. It really shows how complicated, you know, climate change and pollution are. And there's a lot of, you know, kind of effects that we don't even totally understand yet.
Right.
Welcome to Wendy's. Can I help you order?
The story is that the only company they looked at that wasn't sharing data was Amazon Clinic, which is a big tech company.
I know, that absolutely killed me, because I was wondering, they kept saying 49 of 50, and I was like, what's the 50th one? And yeah, it's Amazon.
And listeners might be thinking, isn't this personal medical? Let's go to space and then back again in this next story, because this is news about the Artemis 1 moon mission. The Orion capsule landed back on Earth, right? But where do we go from here with that project?
Yeah, finally. So after, I don't know if you remember, or listeners remember that, you know, this is the launch that got delayed a few times, but both the Orion capsule just returned to Earth, got picked up and sent to San Diego. So this mission was really kind of a baseline, and researchers at NASA were hoping to learn a lot from this mission that would help inform future missions. You know, testing the heat shields on the return capsule and kind of all of these things. So, you know, Orion went all the way to the moon, about 269,000 miles away, and deployed 10 small satellites, and came all the way back.
And some of those satellites didn't really get their job done, did they? Like half of them.
Yeah, so the team lost contact with quite a few of the satellites, I think 3 or 4, including one that was about polar particles, and another one that was headed out to check out some asteroids. So it's not totally lost from here. It's possible that NASA could, you know, get contact back with those satellites. But it sounds like, you know, some of these issues were because of all those launch delays. Some of these satellites had batteries that weren't able to be recharged during all those delays. So we'll have to see what we're able to learn from this mission.
And we're really not going to get people on the next mission for another couple of years, right?
Yeah, so there's another mission that's supposed to launch in a couple of years, but that's another uncrewed launch. So the mission people on is going to launch in 2026.
There you go. Something different. Scientists have finally discovered that snakes have clear resistance.
Yeah, there's a few reasons that it takes a while. I think part of it is, you know, there's small organisms that are fragile, but honestly, there's a big part of it that has to do with representation science. You know, a lot of things, especially just don't get studied as much as they do. And I think as we do more into scientific research, we're starting to figure out a lot of things about a lot of species, which is really exciting. Yeah. So this is the organ is called a hemiclitoris, which is kind of a pair or a bifurcated clitoris. is really, really interesting.
So do they know, do scientists know the role of the snake hemiclitoris in reproduction?
So they're not totally sure yet. Based on, what they were able to figure out about this organ, they have nerve endings and blood vessels suggesting that they can kind of swell up with blood and that they can feel things, similar to how the clitoris works in other animals like mammals. And we also know that, snakes rub their tails together before mating, but we don't totally know yet. So that's kind of the next thing that scientists are going to try and figure out is what role these organs play in reproduction and mating in snakes.
Well, I think we've given our listeners some real good icebreaker conversation for this weekend.
I'll be talking about it at all my holiday parties for sure.
Thank you, Casey.
Thanks so much, Ira.
Casey Conhart, climate reporter at MIT Technology Review, based in New York. We have to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to look at a new kind of antibody and its promise for a so far incurable blood cancer. Great results here. Stay with us. This is Science Friday from WNYC Studios. WFSU brings you news from around the state. It's the local voices that make it feel like your station. We bring you here, fair, balanced, trusted regional information. My favorite part of the program is I'm proud to say the Plymouth Foundation sent you new life. Donate now to support local news on WFSU, online at WFSU.org. Thank you. This is Science Friday. I'm Ira Plato. Multiple myeloma is the second most common blood cancer in the U.S., and so far, it's incurable. Patients may live years on treatments, but almost all relapse and may no longer respond to a treatment that was previously working. Researchers are looking for more effective treatments, ones that may increase the time patients are in remission or even avoid relapse entirely. And now, a new experimental treatment is getting good numbers in clinical trials. Called talquetamab, it's been achieving positive results in over 70% of patients overall in phase 1 and phase 2 clinical trials so far, and achieving remissions of much tougher than existing treatment. Here to explain more, plus why multiple myeloma is such a tricky cancer to treat, is Dr. Ajay Chari, Director of Clinical Research for Multiple Myeloma at Mount Sinai's Icahn School of Medicine in New York. Welcome, Dr. Chari.
Thank you so much, Ira. Pleasure to be here.
Nice to have you. So you've gotten data from both phase 1, phase 2 trials of this drug so far. What to you is the most encouraging part of the results?
Yeah, so phase 1 books are published in New England, and phase 2 we just presented at our annual meeting. And I think the most exciting thing is that these are patients, some of whom have exhausted all available therapies, and we're still seeing response rate of 70%. And those responses are deepest remissions can actually be achieved within 2 months. So imagine if you're a patient who's exhausted all therapies to be having one of the deepest, most durable remissions we've had in recent years on this new therapy. So it's incredibly gratifying for our entire healthcare team to be seeing these patients doing so well.
As I mentioned, multiple myeloma is considered incurable. Why is it so common for patients to have a relapse?
That's the million-dollar question. I guess part of it is who gets myeloma. These typically are patients in their 60s and 70s, and we think perhaps everybody might have a little bit of an abnormal plasma cell. So the culprit cell in myeloma is known as a plasma cell, which normally makes antibodies. But when this cancer becomes